Today, we're diving headfirst into one of the most challenging questions out there, a real heavyweight that touches on fairness, faith, and the very idea of forever. Welcome to Wisdom Time. It's a question that has, really tied thinkers in knots for centuries, and it gets right to the heart of what we even mean by justice. So let's just state it plainly. Is it just for a finite sin to get an infinite punishment? I mean, on the surface, that sounds completely off, right? It seems to put divine justice at odds with our basic sense of fairness. But what if the problem isn't the answer? What if the problem is the question itself? Our source material suggests this whole paradox is actually built on some seriously flawed ideas. So here's our game plan. We're going to take this question apart, piece by piece. First, we'll tackle what we even mean by divine justice. Then we'll bust a major myth, what I'm calling the proportionality myth. We'll look at what eternal really means, and then we'll reframe this whole idea of punishment. Finally, we'll explore why what you do matters more than what you call yourself, and hopefully see the whole question in a brand new light. Okay, first up is this thing our source calls the proportionality myth. This is that gut feeling we all have that for something to be fair, the time it takes to do the action should kind of match the time of the consequence. But as we're about to see, our world, it just doesn't work that way. At all. I mean, it sounds logical, right? A small, quick mistake should lead to a small, quick consequence. But just take a look around at our own lives, and you'll see this assumption completely falls apart. Let's start with a really stark example. The act of pulling a trigger might take, 3 seconds? But the consequence is wiping out 50 years of someone's future. Where's the proportionality in that? There is none. The time just doesn't match up. Or think about something we can all relate to. A 2-hour final exam. Just 2 hours of your life can literally set the direction for a 40-year career. A tiny, tiny slice of time with this massive lifelong ripple effect. And here's an even tougher one. A single injection. An act that takes 5 seconds can spark a lifetime of addiction. Our world is absolutely filled with these kinds of examples, where a fleeting moment creates a permanent reality. This idea is so common, it actually has a name. It's called the Pareto Principle, or as most of us know it, the 80-20 rule. It basically says that a huge chunk of the effects often come from a tiny chunk of the causes. And you see this everywhere once you start looking. In business, 80% of sales come from 20% of clients. In software, 20% of the bugs cause 80% of the crashes. It's this fundamental principle of reality. Small inputs can, and often do, lead to gigantic outputs. And what's really interesting is that this isn't some modern business school idea. This very same principle is reflected in ancient religious texts. This hadith, for instance, talks about how a single careless word, an act that takes a split second, can lead to a consequence of enormous weight. So right away, that first pillar of our question, this idea that time has to be proportional, it just crumbles. It's not true in our world, so why would we assume it's true for the next? Okay, so let's move on to the second big mistake in the question. And this one is all about how we misunderstand a single word, eternal or infinite. We throw it around, but we rarely stop to think about what it actually means. Here's the logical trap we fall into. We treat infinity like it's a really, really big number on a number line, but it's not. In math, infinity is a concept. It means without end. So saying infinite years is kind of like saying square circle. It's a contradiction. You're trying to apply a finite measurement, years, to a concept that is, by definition, immeasurable. And this is a huge deal because we just assume time in the afterlife works like time here, 1 second after another in a straight line forever. But what if it doesn't? What if time there is more like a dimension, like a vast space you can move around in, not just a track you're stuck on? The bottom line is, we can't just copy and paste the rules of our world onto a reality that might operate under a completely different set of laws. And this isn't just a philosophical guess. The source material points out that the original Arabic words used in the Quran, like khuld and ebed, don't translate to a specific number of years, even a huge one. They describe a state of being that, from our tiny human perspective, has no visible end. The emphasis isn't on the quantity of time, it's on the quality of that unending state. This brings us to our third point, and honestly, this one is a massive paradigm shift. It challenges the very word punishment. What if that's the wrong word entirely? See, we usually think of punishment as something external. A judge sentences you, a principal gives you detention. It's imposed from the outside. But what if the consequences of our choices are more like a law of nature? Think of it this way. A principal punishes a student, but nature doesn't punish a plant that you don't water. The plant just withers. The withering isn't some arbitrary sentence. It's the natural, built-in result of the neglect. Let's use the story of two farmers to make this crystal clear. Farmer A puts in a few days of work tending his olive saplings. The result? An orchard that provides fruit for generations. Farmer B, on the other hand, neglects his saplings for a few days. The result? They rot and die. Now, was Farmer B punished, or did he simply reap the natural, unavoidable outcome of his own choices? The consequence wasn't some external decree. It grew directly out of the seeds he himself planted or failed to plant. And that idea of reaping what you sow leads us right into our final flawed assumption, which is all about getting hung up on labels instead of looking at the inner reality of a person. We get so confused when what people say they are doesn't line up with what they actually do. There's this timeless parable that just hits the nail on the head. A father asks his two sons to go work. The first one says, "No way." But then he feels bad and goes and does the work. The second one says, "Yes, of course, father," and then does nothing. The question is obvious. Who actually did what the father wanted? Of course, it was the one whose actions lined up with the father's will, not the one who just said the right words. His inner reality was revealed by what he did. So when you put all of this together, a much more coherent picture of divine justice emerges. The core idea is that absolutely nothing gets missed, not one atom's worth of good and not one atom's worth of evil. And since we can't possibly know the inner struggles, the intentions, the true state of another person's heart, only God can see that. It's just not our job to be the cosmic accountants trying to figure out who ends up where. By the way, if you're finding this kind of deep dive into complex ideas valuable, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like our video, and turn on the notification bell. It really does help us keep making these explainers for you. All right, so now that we've pulled apart all those faulty assumptions, let's put this back together and take one last look at that original troubling question. And here it is, the big takeaway. That feeling of unease, that sense of injustice, it wasn't coming from a bad answer. It was coming from a broken question. We were trying to apply our flawed human ideas about time, about fairness, and about punishment to a divine reality where those concepts just don't fit. The problem was never the answer. It was the way we framed the question from the very beginning. And that leaves us with a much more powerful and, frankly, much more personal question. If hell isn't a sentence and heaven isn't a reward, but instead they are the natural, long-term harvest of the seeds we are planting with our actions right here, right now, then what kind of future are we planting today?